so much, everyone, for yet again an overwhelming response for the webinar series this time. We are so overwhelmed with your response and interest in the ability webinars. Today, we'll be talking about Introduction to Specific Learning Disorders with Geetha Gopiji. Thank you so much for joining us. More about her a little later. Let me begin by telling you all that today's webinar is a part of a 7 webinar series, is a part of a series which will be 7 webinars long. I'm so sorry. And the things that we'll be covering in this series would be introduction to SLDs, which is today's webinar, then identification, planning, support systems, and also understanding of the different types of webinars. Like you could see on your screen, the 7 webinars that we'll be covering in this series are on your screen, and we'll be talking about them every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. If you have not registered for the entire series and you have just registered for this particular webinar, our friends and team members shortly would be sharing the link to register for the next webinar. And what you need to do is, while filling up the form, you can select the option yes if you want to register for the entire series instead of registering for just one webinar. Okay, moving on, a little bit about ability. So for us as an organization, all carers of children with special needs, that is special educators, therapists, teachers, parents, everyone, you all are at the center of our universe. We are driven by the mission of making things easier for you all. And when we say easy, we mean making it more affordable, making it more accessible, making it more convenient, and most importantly, making it more effective for you all. One way we have been able to do that is through technology. But technology is only a support system. It only enables the caregivers to give the kind of care that is required. Technology alone is truly insufficient, and we definitely understand the role of caregivers apart from technology. And not just technology, there are other support systems which are required, such as community, such as resources. And that's what we bring to you with ability, because we believe that no one should have to do this alone, right? So with a support system of community and resources, you can enable the best chance for the discovery of your child's true potential. And like I was talking a couple of minutes ago, that we are driven by the mission of making things easier for you. And all these efforts, conducting this webinar series, all the webinars that we have conducted in the past, conducting workshops, all of it is a part of that mission. All of it are efforts that we take in that direction. And we have recently launched workshops, like you all must be aware of. And for workshops, the idea is a little different. What it is it is a session conducted in a smaller group setting, which enables more live interaction with the expert, since the group is small, and it definitely enables a better learning experience and a deeper understanding of the topic for all the attendees. So that's what we do when we conduct ability workshops. And like you must already be aware that we have a YouTube channel by the name Ability. So like I was talking about that we offer that support through resources. These videos also act as resources. There are hundreds of useful videos for children with special needs uploaded in our channel. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do. Our team members will be sharing the link to the YouTube channel shortly in the inbox. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe that channel so that you can stay updated and posted about all our upcoming videos. Apart from that, one thing that you can also do is follow our Facebook page. Thousands of people are already following it. And if you all also join them, you would stay updated about all the webinars, workshops, and other events that we are planning to conduct in future to make things easier for you all, like I said. Okay, now without taking much of time, let me come and let me start talking about today's session. It would be conducted by Madam Geetha Gopi, who is a rehabilitation practitioner and psychologist. She's the director of professional development and programs at the Sashakti Karan Trust, Cochin, with over 30 years of experience in helping children with special needs. She has worked in international schools and done some intensive work in curriculum development and adaptations, behavioral management, coordinating and promoting best educational practices using UDL principles. She has also launched an early academic series, which is a teacher's kit for teaching early English language skills and basic mathematics. So we are so grateful to have you here with us today. Geetha ji, thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I would request you to please take over. And I'm pretty sure all our attendees today are very excited and eager to hear you.
Thank you, Swatiji, and happy to be associated with Ability and this series of webinars on a very pertinent topic, that is specific learning disorder. So a warm good evening to all the participants, everybody who is going to benefit from this association. Okay, so before as Swati ji has already mentioned, this is just one of a series of webinars that's to come. I'll probably dwell on what each webinar would be towards the end of this webinar. So since this is an introductory one to specific learning disorders, I'll get into it straight away. Okay. Yeah, so I'll be just sharing my screen now. Okay, so today is the first of the series of webinars on specific learning disorder. And today we are going to focus on the definition, prevalence, and classification of specific learning disorders. What are some of the commonly noticed characteristics of children who have this issue? Associated conditions with that occur concurrently with specific learning disorder, and an overview on management, on what do we have to do if we come across children who have learning difficulties or behavioral difficulties associated with specific learning disorder. So this is just an introductory webinar which will be an umbrella to the other webinars that are to follow. So going straight into what is the definition of specific learning disorder, understanding what the condition is. So specific learning disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it is very internal. It has a biological origin. And what comes about is, despite having an average, above average, or close to, that is near average intelligence, the children still have difficulties uh, perceiving or processing verbal and non-verbal information in an efficient and accurate manner. So this disorder actually impacts the brain's ability to perceive and process information in an efficient and accurate manner. And what happens is, because of this difficulties in processing, it manifests as academic difficulties and deficit skill sets that are necessary for achieving academic success. So it is not just the academic difficulties that are affected, but are also skills and behaviors that are necessary for academic achievements. So going into a formal definition of SLD, I'm going by the DSM-5, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, which came up in 2013. That is the one that is being currently used. And what it does is, according to the DSM-5, the earlier concept of an IQ achievement, IQ score and an achievement score discrepancy was earlier used to assess SLD. But that requirement has been eliminated as per DSM-5. Instead, 4 different criteria have been introduced. That is, one is having difficulties in at least one of the areas, that is reading, writing, and maths, for a period of at least 6 months. Despite getting targeted help, the child continues to experience those difficulties. Another one, the second criteria is having substantial difficulties uh, with in academic achievement with respect to the child's age. So causing impairments in the school work, or in everyday life settings. Facing difficulties during school age, although with some of the children, they may not experience significant problems until adulthood, when academic, work, or day to day life demands are much greater, especially with the very mild afflicted people. Having difficulties, but which are not due to, despite that is ruling out certain kinds of conditions such as vision or hearing impairments, uh, intellectual disability, children coming from economic or environmental disadvantage, lack of proper instruction in schools, or difficulty understanding a second language or a different language, if the medium of instruction is not in the child's native language. So these kind of things have to be ruled out before we actually narrow in on the diagnosis of SLD. So all these conditions are not part of specific learning disorder. When we look at classification and types of SLD, prominently 3, and a fourth one is also added on now. One is dyslexia, which is the most commonly seen, which encompasses difficulties particularly pertaining to reading and comprehension. Dyscalculia, that is difficulties in mathematical skills. Dysgraphia, difficulties in writing. Non-verbal LD, that is understanding patterns, relationships, understanding certain kinds of concepts, especially if they're abstract concepts, and so on. So these kind of 4 classification is given, but in most of the children you find an overlap between these, because basically specific learning disorder is an information processing difficulty. And if it is when it is an information processing difficulty, it may have a spilling over effect in different areas. So even if the child has dyslexia, for example, that will still have some kind of an effect even in their math skills or in their writing skills and so on. Although the predominant difficulty may be in the area of reading and comprehension. So similarly, there is a lot of overlap in these kind of types and classification. But in a particular child, you may find elements of all of these or some of these. When we look at the severity levels of SLD, we can classify them as mild, moderate, and severe. When they have mild difficulties, some difficulties are noticed in 1 or 2 academic areas, but maybe with a little bit of targeted help or slightly different kind of instruction, they may be able to compensate and move along with the mainstream schooling. So some mild level of support systems would help. A little more severe would be having moderate level of difficulties. That means they would have significant difficulties with learning, and therefore they would require specialized teaching, quite often specialized special education services such as remedial education, and then also the use of certain kinds of accommodations or supportive services that will help them achieve better progress. So they need more intensive support as compared to the mild category. Severe is they do have far more difficulties with learning, and it affects not just one but several academic areas, and many of these children require ongoing intensive specialized teaching, and from different grade levels, and as the curriculum demands get higher, you may have to review the kinds of support you're providing, and the kind of, even sometimes the placement options may have to be reviewed. So 3 levels according to the severity. What we see, 3 broad areas that is noticed in specific learning disorder. One is difficulties in academic learning. The second is deficits in skills and behaviors that are necessary for academics. And as a result of these two, issues with behaviors or emotions which arise because of academic difficulties and these skills, deficit skills and behavior that are necessary for acquiring academics. So quite often behavior and emotional issues are a fallout of the difficulties in academic and related skill sets, and therefore they need to be addressed. And if they're not addressed, that's when it results in more emotional and behavior issues. To elaborate a little bit on these difficulties in academic learning, we talked about reading and comprehension. Some of the things that are seen in this area is, difficulties recognizing letters, confusion between similar looking letters, associating the shape of a letter with its sound, being able to use, letter sounds to sound out words, or sometimes even if they have developed some reading, they may be not be reading fluently. They may be struggling or reading in a very halted manner, like pausing over every word and trying to decipher the word. Sometimes they do read well, but they may not understand what they're reading. So after they read, when you ask them, they have no idea what they've read. So comprehend difficulties with comprehension. Written expression, you can have handwriting issues such as not being able to hold a pencil or manipulate a pencil over paper, writing, forming the letter shapes correctly, etc. Uh, Slightly more advanced children, they even some of them may not have handwriting issues as such, but they may have issues with written expression, which is being able to express ideas or answers to questions in their own words. So being able to form sentences and express them in written in writing. Even doing things like creative writing, writing an essay or forming a sentence on their own, etc. Mathematical concepts and calculations. Here again, you find many of them have difficulty understanding the number systems, the basic operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Word problems may be difficult for many of these children. Remembering the tables, so math rules and facts, multiplication tables, etc. These are the kind of commonly seen mathematical issues. Apart from all this, even subject content mastery, many of them do have difficulties in this area. That is learning and remembering subject matter concepts and related information, related vocabulary that may relate to other subjects such as science or social studies and so on. So these are commonly, just a peek into what are the academic learning difficulties you find. Deficits in skills and behaviors. Again, very broad area, but I'm just going to kind of demarcate them into 4 areas. Listening and speaking, they may have difficulty in this area. Logical thinking and reasoning, attention and memory. And in some of the kids, you also have difficulties or deficiencies in motor coordination. So what are some of the deficits in skills and behaviors? Again, a small peek into this area. Difficulty processing information that may be communicated through lectures or class discussions. Inability to discriminate between similar kind of sounds, so they may result in pronunciation errors. Unable to filter out either background noises and focus on what is at hand. Unable to follow directions and carry out tasks, following out instructions. Deciding or unable to focus on narrow their focus onto a particular visual image when there are multiple images present. difficulty understanding relationships between objects, positions, concepts, etc. Understanding patterns, things which repeat itself, even if they are things that repeat itself in a certain fashion, inability to recognize and understand and predict these kind of patterns, difficulties with planning tasks, organizing, management, time management, and so on. So, sensory issues are not very prominent as in certain other disabilities, but some of them do display, over or diminished responses to sensory stimuli. So, if there is like a big glare on the board, they may have difficulties focusing on the board. If there is a lot of noise around, again, that may set them off. So, not being able to tolerate high levels of noise, etc. So some of these are, the kinds of skills, deficits in skills and behaviors seen. And if these things are left unaddressed, or if we don't address them in the right way, or the right kind of help is not given, they may spill over as behavior or emotional issues. And a lot of times what happens is specific learning disorder is a condition that is not as easily observable as other disabilities are. It's more like an invisible handicapping or a disability condition. So therefore, these children, they look normal, they behave normally, they seem to be just as any other kid in the classroom. So they tend to be least understood, and they end up getting the least amount of empathy from parents, school, teachers, peers, and so on. And therefore, because they're least understood and least empathized with, many of their difficulties, that is, difficulties related to academics as well as the related behaviors and skill sets, may not even be recognized as being part of a disorder or as part of something that needs supportive services or needs remedial services. And therefore, they may go unaddressed, especially in the early schooling years. Many of them do display a low motivation to learn because of the struggles that they go through. Uh, and then, because of all this, because of repeated negative learning experiences or struggles, because of not getting the right kind of support systems at the right kind in the early years, particularly, they end up having, feelings of frustration, anger, depression, anxiety, and many of them end up having, overall, this has a very adverse effect on their overall mental health even in later on life. So it is very important that though the specific learning disorder may not seem as obvious as other disability conditions, once you recognize that the child is trailing behind, we should always try and address those needs and see what help can be provided to the child as early as possible. So ultimately, we are coming to the overall management. What do we do when we have children who display academic difficulties? As I mentioned earlier, as per the DSM-5 definition, we have to give some kind of targeted help, targeted supportive education. So when the child is trailing behind academically or has difficulties with, concurrent behaviors such as attention issues, because a lot of children with specific learning disorder also display a very commonly seen concurrent conditions such as ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So in these kind of cases, when you see behaviorally or academically the children are having troubles and they're falling behind, one of the first things you can do, and most teachers do try and do, is give some kind of supportive services. Try different kinds of strategies. Try to give more individualized help or small group help rather than just addressing the issue in a large group classroom. So once these things are given, and despite targeted help being given, if the child is still not, making very minimal progress or not is not showing any progress, or they continue to struggle, then definitely, they need to go in for a greater detailed assessment to find out what exactly their difficulties are, what their learning styles are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that the right kind of help can be given. So one of the ways, especially in schools, this can be done is if you have school-wide screening, that can be employed at either at every grade level or at different stages. Say, for example, at the end of preschool, the KG, before they go into grade one, or after grade one and two, at at the end of grade two, so on. At different stages in the educational process, if screening can be done, and
Hi, Geetha, it's
children
Anshul.
with, yes.
So sorry to interrupt you. Some of the attendees are saying that they're not able to hear you very clearly. Could you please adjust your earphones or maybe try speaking a little louder? A
Sure.
few of them are facing difficulty in
Oh,
hearing you
sure,
properly.
sure, sure.
So sorry.
Okay, no issues. Okay, so I hope I'm a bit audible now. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, this was slightly
Yeah.
better.
So, doing school-wide screening does help. If you have grade level criteria skills, that kind of can help in early detection. So, where early detection does not necessarily mean the child has specific learning disorder, but it could be that the child is trailing behind, but that could be an indicator of maybe there's a risk factor. So, we do not know at that stage. But having said that, it is not important to diagnose at that stage. What is important is detect the problems, try and give the supportive services that are necessary. And if the child is still not showing progress or is showing minimal progress or continue to struggle, that's when the child needs to go in for a more detailed and formal assessment. And again, formal assessment, especially in the early years, is not really diagnosed as specific learning disorder. It is usually taken as academic difficulties. The specific learning disorder, especially in, for example, know in India, according to the Government of India guidelines, it's only after 8 years of age you can formally diagnose specific learning disorder. Prior to that, if you detect the child has academic difficulties, supportive services are put in place and that is administered. But for formal diagnosis is not made until the child is 8 years plus. So it is that we are giving the children targeted help, we are giving intervention and monitoring that response to intervention so that, before we even give a diagnostic label. And this is also in keeping with the DSM-5, definition of SLD. So we do not, especially in the early years, I repeat again, we are not interested in giving a diagnostic label in the early years. Instead, what is important is to find out what difficulties the child has and provide services to cater to those difficulties. So, what are some of the service that these children may need? They may need supportive education or remedial education, parental counseling, particularly family counseling, personal counseling sometimes with regard to children, sensory integration therapy, if training, or if not therapy, at least sensory integration training, because to incorporate all the sensory modalities and bring about a more wholesome learning. And if they need any additional therapies such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, etc., that needs to be provided as well. And medical help. Sometimes some children may have other medical conditions which may contribute to a specific learning disorder, or maybe a part of a comorbid situation like ADHD, or some of the children may have, epilepsy. Some of them may have hypothyroidism. So if there are certain medical conditions that are also contributing, then those conditions need to be taken care of with the help of medical professionals. Apart from this, many of these children also need training in social skills and life skills training, because many a time struggles with academics also results in peer group relations, being able to perform in a school setting and so on. So these kind of lacunae have to be plugged in, and social skill training has to be provided. Life skills training, again, some of the academic areas may be very difficult for some of the children. For example, say the child has difficulty in math. So maybe in the high school level, for example, the child may not be able to cope with math at the high school level, which is full of abstract concepts. But then life skill maths or functional maths have to be provided in such cases, so that at least the kind of math that they require for day-to-day life situations is given. So this is what I mean by life skills training. That even if there are gaps in certain areas, we try and plug in those gaps and make them as much as possible adaptive to their daily life situations, what they may require in daily life situations. And last but not the least, accommodations and modifications. Accommodations and modifications can happen with regard to teaching, with regard to the how the learning is presented, with regard to curriculum, with regard to provisions that are given for taking exams or appearing for board exams, and so on. So again, these are all very all these things together provide wholesome supportive services. So whenever we are planning intervention or supportive service programs, there needs to be an appropriate placement of the child in the setting, as well as provision for the following. And when we talk about placements, again, uh, we are, as much as possible, they should be in inclusive settings. They should be in mainstream schools. But if at some time, with when you review, if the child is really struggling, or this does happen with some of the severe cases, that despite giving all the supportive services even from early on, when they reach higher classes or higher grade levels, they may find it difficult to cope with the regular mainstream curriculum. So they may have to move into curricula or school settings which are not part of the mainstream. So sometimes so what is important is what would enable the child to function in the best manner possible and achieve their highest potential. That is what needs to be looked at when you plan for placement and provide provisions. So this is what will give you an overall and effective management of children with specific learning disorders. So that brings us to an end of this first webinar. This was just, a big umbrella of introducing the condition to the participants. And in the forthcoming webinars, we'll be going into the next one would be on how to identify and diagnose issues that are related to specific learning disorders. So we'll be talking about, what are the early indicators which could, give a risk factor uh, to SLD. And then, what are the diagnostic criteria as per DSM-5, as per the government regulations, and how do we go about diagnosing? And the third webinar would be on after diagnosis, how do we plan instruction? What are the things to be taken care of while planning instruction, how it can be made more wholesome and more effective for children with specific learning disorders. uh, the fourth webinar will be on the other support systems other than instruction, the additional support systems that are necessary for children to function in a school setting, or not just in a school setting, even at workplace, or other additional support systems that they may need in addition to instructional instructions and teaching. Then we go into more specific areas such as, understanding dyslexia, that is reading comprehension difficulties. What are the different things we see in this area? How do we go about, trying to support children who have these issues? The next one would be on, the sixth one would be on understanding dysgraphia, that is difficulties related to writing. And we would be talking about what are the different writing difficulties and how to manage those. The last one would be on understanding math difficulties, that is dyscalculia. So how again understanding what are different kinds of math difficulties and how to go about managing those. So this will be a complete, webinar series on SLD. I hope this will really be useful to all the participants. Okay, that brings us to an end of this evening session. Thank you. We can
Thank you.
probably go on to the question and answers.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Geetha ji. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session. I'm pretty sure most of the participants I was going through the chat window are asking the registration link for the entire series. So everyone is quite excited about the upcoming webinars in the series. Thank you so much for a wonderful session. Before I begin with the Q&A segment, I would like to inform our attendees that in the series of efforts that Ability is taking as an organization to make things easier for all the caregivers, we have recently launched the school webinar series. So, if you belong to a school, if you are a school administrator and you want an Ability webinar to be conducted specifically for your school, we can make that happen. The topics that around which these webinars would be conducted would majorly be around mental well-being, academic difficulties, and life skills. So what you need to do is, if you want us to conduct a webinar specially for your school, you can write to us at support@ability.com. Let me spell it out for a clear understanding. Our team members will also be sharing the same in the chat box as well. SUPPORT, support@ability, EBLITY.com. So please write to us if you think that conducting an Ability webinar for your school would be beneficial for all the children studying in your school, for maybe parents, for teachers. We can target different sets of audience. And without further ado, let's begin with the Q&A segment. We have received a lot of questions, but I have tried to pick the more common ones so that we can answer most people who are attending this session today. So one of the questions that a lot of people have asked is, how can you plan interventions for a child whose attention span is very, very poor? What can be done to plan interventions for such a child?
Yeah. We will be actually going into more details regarding these in the upcoming webinars, but just to give you a little bit of, if children do have attention difficulties, one thing is they have a very short attention span. So when you're planning instructional activities, plan for short activities. So don't go for long duration activities. Or if the activity is of a long duration, then break it up into installments and give little breaks in between. So conduct those activities with little built-in breaks so that it helps the child. Otherwise, you lose the child's focus, and people who have dealt with children who have attention issues know that it's very difficult then to get the child. Then they try to misbehave and so on. The other thing is to understand that many of these children who do have attention issues, especially if they have ADHD, then there is an inherent need in their body for movement. These children need a lot of movement. So to provide those movements in acceptable ways within the classroom or within your learning activities. So, have little activities which are action songs, or, where they have to move their arms and legs or do a little bit of walk around the classroom, things like that. So, yeah, try and address the need for movement, but do it in more positive ways so that the child is not moving around and disrupting the class.
Right, right. Great. Hope that helps. So, one of the other questions that is being asked by Mazhar, who is one of the attendees attending the webinar today, is his son is 7 years old, very active, very sporty, but does not like to sit and write. And he forgets what he learns and can't grab all at once what he's being told. Mazhar believes that he definitely understands what is being told, but he can't remember what he learns. So he's seeking solution to this particular problem.
Um, if usually with children who are very physically active, and and if they don't like to sit and do written work or tabletop work, Many of them learn better through movement. And so try and incorporate activities which will involve movement. That is, use their fingers, write in sand and so on, or use finger painting, writing even in the air, like big gross finger movements in the air. Those kind of things help with children who have these kind of issues. You may also have to do things like manipulatives, use letter cutouts or flashcards to physically manipulate and learn words or learn numbers and so on. So that will help. You try and incorporate movement into their learning activities. So they learn better through those modalities.
Right, right. Hope you're listening, mother, and maybe try incorporating movement, and that can help your kid and so many others who might be dealing with a similar challenge. Okay, moving on. This is a question from a special educator. A lot of special educators have also joined us for this session today. It is a question from John Michael. He's asking that what are the major barriers for learners with specific learning disorders? And being a special educator, how can we go past these barriers?
See, the biggest barrier, like I said earlier, is their difficulty in processing information, which is what is resulting in reading, writing, arithmetic, and those kind of difficulties. So, uh, as I said, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So, if there is an established disorder, it is going to be there in the system throughout life. So, what we can do is when we intervene early, we can set in place systems and habits and strategies which the child can utilize to circumvent those processing issues. So this will actually become more clearer once we go through the webinars. Each area will be tackled, so that will become more clearer. What we actually do is, see, for example, like I said, if a child has trouble learning visually, then you probably give another modality, give the child learning through hearing. So if a child has, say, struggles with reading, and that is interfering with his studying, then probably give you an audio text, or give a technology support such as text to speech, and apply that over their books, so that the computer will read for them and they have to just listen and follow along. So these are the kind of support systems you have to give. You always have to look at what are the strengths of the children and what are the weaknesses or the needs of the challenges they have. So use the strengths to overcome the weaknesses. We may not overcome the weaknesses to completely, because especially if it's an established disorder, it is neurodevelopmental, it's not going to go away. What we can do is
Right,
minimize the effects and make the child as functional as possible. And today,
right.
with the help of technology, a great amount is possible.
Definitely, definitely. Hope that helps. Okay. The next question, I know that this topic would be covered in much greater detail in the upcoming webinars. This is related to dyslexia, and it seems that a lot of attendees today have are facing challenges related to dyslexia, and which is why I want to bring this question up. But I would definitely like to recommend that all of you must attend the webinar, which would be specifically talking about dyslexia in much greater detail. But a lot of attendees here are asking us, Dr. Geetha, that how can we help children with dyslexia, and especially in this new normal setup, what are some of your recommended teaching techniques as a special education teacher in terms of delivering content and learning experiences to students who are dyslexic?
Yeah, very nice question. Again, it's a very vast question because no two children with dyslexia are alike. Different children have different problems, so we have to address each child as the case may be. Uh, some of the children, especially if they're in the younger classes, they may have trouble recognizing letters and so on. A lot of dyslexia or reading difficulties have to do with visual processing difficulties. because they don't perceive
Right.
the visual print information in an efficient and accurate manner. So what you have to do is, when you know the difficulty is in the visual processing area, then you have to use the other modalities. So, the auditory, like I just gave an example earlier, use an audio text, or use a motor movement, like writing alphabets in the air, writing on sand, giving that touch, the tactile learning. So when you give a different modality, it is, it's, if I give an analogy, so suppose you're talking about a completely visual impaired person, a person with no vision, blindness. How does that person learn? They learn through touch, right? So
Right.
it is kind of similar. Although these children have vision, they have trouble in the way the visual stimuli is processed. So therefore, you have to compensate for that difficulty by using the other modalities like touch or movement and so on. So, use Play-Doh, for example, to create the shapes of letters. Use finger painting to do the letters. Use sand or rice or any kind of material to where they can feel the letters. Even letter cutouts or flashcards, sand letters. Sandpaper letters are very commonly used. So use things like these. Sometimes you can even give them pictorially, because sometimes some children have trouble with print, like print of words and such, but they may not have trouble with pictures. So, try to visualize a word. For example, if the word is fire, write the word fire and draw a fire, around it, or write the word inside a flame of a fire. So that visual, that pictorial visual would give them a better handle of the word. So use
Right.
strategies which will give them a hook to compensate for the deficit they have.
Wow, that sounds interesting. I would also, I wish someone would have taught me, like, drawing fire around the word fire seems like an interesting technique. Definitely, it would be helpful to children who have dyslexia, I hope. Okay, moving on. A lot of parents here, Geeta ji, are telling us that their kids don't listen to them generally. And what they're asking is, irrespective of the age, is there any common methodology or a technique which can help the kid to listen keenly to them in order to learn? Because the first step towards learning is listening, kind of. And how can we inculcate that habit of listening in kids?
I think rather than just listening, I would say engaging the learner is more important. Okay, so I know a lot of parents have this thing that we say, or even teachers, we say and they listen. It shouldn't be like that. It should be more of a give and take. So try to engage the learner. Engage the learner means you have to think more creatively about how can you present that material. Can you present it in a story form, or can you talk about it, show them a video beforehand and get them talking about it, or just have an oral discussion on this, uh, on the topic, and then come into the learning part of it, the academic learning part of it, or do project based learning. Try ask the children to go on the net, surf pictures relating to these, and so on. So do things like these which will actually elicit an interest in the child uh, to to learn these topics. The other thing is, yes, tabletop work is not easy for a lot of children, especially if they have specific learning disorder. So try and reduce the tabletop work in these fashions. Try and incorporate different kinds of activities, so the monotony of sitting long hours on a chair and table is taken out. That is one way of doing it. The other is actually behavior management. Behavior management is, have a schedule, put the schedule out near their desk or whatever, and tick off if after they've done these things, okay, check those off. Have a kind of deal with your children, kind of like, okay, if you've done this many these things, then you get a half an hour's TV time, or you get an extra play time or something like that. So have a behavior management chart or something at home, and try and shape their behaviors to what you want them to be. But again, having said that, you have to bear in mind that children do have different kinds of learning modalities and all that. So you have to take all those into account before planning for when you insist on tabletop work, because different children learn differently.
Sure, sure. That is something that every expert, every speaker has been telling us in all the webinars that I have conducting and been attending, that every child learns differently, different children learn differently. Such an important message to remember. Okay. And since there are a lot of educators present in the gathering today, what they're asking is how can you explain a parent that their child is struggling in academics due to a learning disorder if the parent is in complete denial? So, what can be done to explain such parents?
See, this is, yeah. Normally, the parents come to, it depends on, whether the parents have come to you or the school is informing the parent. If the parents have come to you, obviously they know there is some difficulty, or probably the school has told them that they need to take their child for an assessment because the child is struggling. So normally what we do is we do, we take some background information on what the difficulties they are facing, both in school and at home, and then see whether the child needs an assessment, especially if they're in very early stages and if they've just started school and the school has already told them, the child is not catching up, then we probably do a wait and watch. We try and say, okay, let us do things a bit differently. Maybe these are the skills the school is teaching and probably they're doing it in this way, but this child probably has difficulty maybe sitting down or focusing. So as I said earlier, try different kinds of activities that will be more that will engage the student more. So try
Okay.
those intervention strategies and then monitor and go along. But if a formal diagnosis is made, I mean, then that means formal tests would be administered. Otherwise, you cannot make a formal diagnosis. And it is
Right.
based on the test results. So, the test results, it's communicate that these are the tests you've done, these are the scores, and this is what the child is having difficulty in. These are the areas which are the child's strengths, and these are the areas with the child's difficulty areas where they need a lot of support. And explain to them that these support systems, or these remedial education or whatever intervention services the child would need is necessary for the child to achieve their potential. If the right help is not given at the right times, like I said earlier, it can spiral into behavior issues, emotional issues later on. Also, the academic difficulties, the gap between what the child is achieved and what the required class or grade level required grade level expectation is, can widen as it goes along. So
Right.
as the grade levels go higher, so rather than let it widen and then when you give help too late, not enough progress is got at that stage. The earlier you intervene, the more sessions you give at the earlier stages, the better it is for the child. So try and
Definitely.
explain that. Sometimes it doesn't happen over one session, it happens over several sessions. And but again, I just remind myself, ultimately it's the parent who has to take the call. They have to just put all the options in front of them and say, if you do this is what the child is going to achieve. They may need this kind of help, but again, give realistic expectations. That is very important, because with SLD it's a very, very uh, unpredictable domain. So even after say so many years of experience, you can never predict that, okay, this child will achieve this much progress in this much amount of time. So tell
Right.
the parent that we will start the services, let it go along. Usually it takes around 6 months at least for the services to start showing effect. 3 months is a minimum. Six definitely. From within 6 months, you start seeing some kind of progress. But if the struggle continues, again, that is more of an indicator, okay, there is an established, or there is a real risk factor for an established disorder. But otherwise, usually if it is just academic difficulties, then or maybe the child just learns differently, then different kinds of learning strategies would help the child, and they'll be able to move on. So it is, giving as many sessions and explaining to the parents, but ultimately it's their call. They have to decide what is best for their child.
Sure. Yeah. Bringing more awareness probably in this sphere with webinars like these and with experts like these could help more and more parents. That's what I hope. Okay. A lot of parents have also asked, I'm not sure if these are parents or special educators, they're asking how can you differentiate between specific learning disorder and autism spectrum disorder for children who are below 5 years of age. So a specific set of differences if you could point out.
Yeah. It is very easily noticeable, because with autism spectrum disorders, they have their primary trouble is not in academics. Their primary difficulties lie in social skills and communication skills, and being able to interact with others, being able to speech and language problems. These are the kind of difficulties that are more prominent in them, and because of that, yes, it will have it will have ramifications even in the academic area. Whereas with children who have specific learning disorders, or indicators of, again, as I said, specific learning disorder is not formally diagnosed before 8 years. But that doesn't mean
Right.
that the indicators are not seen early on. The
Right.
indicators would be there, but the indicators would be more like, they may be just like any other child. There may not be significant delay in all the other areas of development. It is, and usually it is noticed when they enter school. So before
Right.
schooling years, it's very rare that parents recognize these. Uh, Sometimes I've had parents who had, their older child has an established SLD, so therefore they were more aware when it came to the younger child. So
Right.
even when the younger child just started school, right in KG1 itself, the parents said, "I think there is an issue here," because with the elder one, I did have similar issues, but we waited until grade 3 or grade 4 to get help because we didn't know. But because they knew, again, as you said, awareness matters. So the mother was noticing more with the younger child, and therefore she started getting help for the younger child more much earlier. So with SLD, definitely, quite more often than not, it is recognized after formal schooling starts.
Right, right. And on that note, actually, I would like to ask my next question, which is very much related to this. So, the educators in the school are asking us, mostly in public schools or sometimes few of the government schools, the resources are limited. And what they want to know is what can be good indicators to identify children with specific learning disorders, or maybe recommend assessments or formal assessments or diagnosis to them. What are those indicators? How can they identify?
The indicators, actually, we'll be dealing with indicators much more detail in the second webinar, the upcoming webinar. Uh, the main indicators are, just have a look at your classroom. And if you see that the majority of the kids are, catching on, moving along, uh, and this particular child, despite being very bright and just as normal as any other kid, has no other issues except when it comes to academics, or related behaviors like attention, or sitting down and doing their task, or writing, or completing their task on time, and such things. So once you see that, that is a good indicator in the first thing, that okay, maybe this child needs it may not be an indicator of SLD, but yes, it is an indicator that the child needs help and
Right.
supportive services. So try and give it right there. With regard to public schools, government schools especially, I think I know in India, definitely, with the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan coming from the central government. I know that in most of the government schools, they are under, there are special educator visits and such that happens from the each block, educational blocks. There are each state, in each district, I think they have different educational blocks, and each blocks have resource centers. From these resource centers, special educators do visit the government schools, and they identify and all that. Yeah, the services are very scarce, because probably for many schools you have one special educator or a couple of special educators, but the service is there. It is just that not enough special educators are around.
Right.
And they do a lot of they do have their own, each state has their own criteria for screening and referring children and all that.
That's pretty valuable piece of information that you have shared right there. And yeah, services are there, but it is not easily accessible. And hopefully, that's a gap that we are trying to fill through our mission, and that's the like mission of our ability as an organization. Hopefully, we would be able to fill that gap. Okay, since we are running short of time, I'll take one last question. Although I would never like to end this conversation, which is so interesting. But one last question. The special educator is asking that all academic difficulties might not necessarily mean or might not necessarily indicate a specific learning disorder. But how do you differentiate? What is the barrier for differentiation? Maybe you will cover that in greater detail. And if you could also differentiate between a slow learner and a kid with SLD.
Okay. Uh, Again, as I said in the next webinar, where it comes to identification and diagnosis, this would be covered in much more detail. Uh, I think it will be better because to wait until then. But one indicator is, as I said, it's not important to diagnose SLD. Especially in the initial stages. What is important is to recognize that the child has difficulties and provide the right kind of supportive services. The
Right,
diagnosis can come later on as and when it is required. If the
right,
schools require a report, and as I said, in many countries would have their own norms. In India, you cannot formally diagnose a child with SLD until the child is 8 years plus,
right,
only after third grade. So only then is a formal diagnosis necessary. Sometimes we don't even think it's necessary until high school, just before the board exams. But that doesn't mean that supportive services don't have to be provided. So again,
right,
we need to move away from this diagnostic mindset into any child, doesn't matter whether they have SLD or not. If they have a problem, address the problem, give the supportive services. Okay.
great,
And
great.
slow learner is not technically a category, although this is very commonly used. Normally, slow learners are the children who usually fall between the IQ range, which is in borderline intelligence. When there is average and above average intelligence, then there's IQ below 70, which constitutes intellectual disability. So the in between, the 85 to 90 is considered average and above. 85 to 90 plus is considered average and above. So the in between, between 70 to 85 is considered more like the borderline children. And these are the children who are usually called slow learners. Although technically, if you look at all the DSM-5 definition and everything, there's no such category called slow learners. Many of them end up being either severe, usually many of them are severe learning SLD, or sometimes they are, as I said, again, it's in between. So it's a very gray area. Technically, normally that is not mentioned. Usually it is mentioned as severe SLD as per DSM-5.
Got it. Wow, that made the difference pretty clear to me. Hopefully, it does it for all our other attendees also. And that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation and for the wonderful session today. Would you like to say some closing words for the session today?
Thank you, Ability, for this platform, and it's a pleasure to reach out to so many people at one go. So, and it's great that they're responding with such great questions, and it's very evident from the community who's registered for these webinars. So, thank you for providing me this platform, and always a pleasure to be associated with you. And I'm
Thank
looking forward to the next webinars that are going to follow in this series. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely.
And a big thanks to all the participants as well.
Yeah, definitely. So if you have not registered for the series yet, please find the link in the chat box and register for the entire series so that you can attend more webinars from Geetha ji and her colleague Toby. Also, please do provide your feedback. It is very, very valuable to us. It will help us improve the experience further for you all. So the feedback link is also being shared in the chat box. Apart from that, we did receive a lot of questions related to autism. If you are interested in autism as a topic as such, you would want to attend our next webinar on 9th of January. We have been sending email invites and circulating it in the WhatsApp community. You can register from there. Also, when you fill the feedback form, after that you would be redirected to the a webinar on autism. Especially, you can register for that webinar as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.